For those of you that have a chain-driven bike, Mike's bike right here is shaft drive. There's lubricant in the differential or in the rear, and that does need to be changed frequently. Every 12,000 kilometers is recommended for Kawasaki. But if you change it every time you change your own oil, if you're doing your own oil changes, do it then. You can't over-change the oil. The cleaner the oil is, the better it is. You can also use a synthetic base, which will actually last longer and suspend the dirt particles in the oil instead of in the gears. And that is done just by draining. There's a small bolt on the bottom that you just drop, put a pan underneath it, catch the oil, and then loosen the, put the nut back in, and then put your lubricant in the top right up to the threads. That's with Kawasaki. Some motorcycles, they actually have a sight window or a overflow line. You put in the lubricant, pull out the other bolt until it comes out, and then you're good to go. Now, those people that have chain-driven bikes, you do need to lubricate your chain. The more often you lubricate the chain, the longer it's going to last. The recommendation for chain lubricant is every 300 to 500 kilometers. I usually recommend that after you have ridden in rain, you want to lubricate it then too. If you're by yourself, it's a bit of a pain. It can be challenging. And what you want to do when you're lubricating a chain is that you have two plates on both sides of the chain. You have an outer plate and an inner plate. And then you also have an outer plate and inner plate on the inside. And you want to get your lubricant inside on both of those pins. Inside, there's a pin that goes all the way through, and in between the two plates, there's usually an O-ring. And what happens is when moisture gets in there, it starts to rust, it causes the chain to kink, which will actually cause a tight spot in your chain, and then it'll also prematurely wear out your sprockets, and potentially can affect your output shaft bearing. On some KLRs, what happens is when their chain's too tight, it'll actually affect the bearing there, and then you have to pull the motor and split the cases to fix it. So it becomes kind of costly when you can, for $15 with a can of chain lube, lubricate it every time you go riding. You're the chain will, you'll get a lot of life out of the chain. If you don't lubricate it, in about 1,000 kilometers, you're going to have to replace both the chain sprockets, front sprocket, rear sprocket, and the chain. So if you're by yourself, what you're going to want to do is spray the chain as much as you can, and then push the bike backwards. Because we're on a hill, I have the bike in gear so it doesn't roll away, because it is a brand new motorcycle. Just like that, and spray it until you get it all the way around. Now, if you have a sport bike and you have a buddy with you, it makes it really easy to do with two people. And the best way is to put one foot on the side stand, grab the bike, and lift up on the back, and the other person spins the rear tire. And that way you can lubricate your chain. You don't want to do this with the motorcycle running it in gear. You'll lose a finger. And that's pretty much your basic motorcycle maintenance. You do want to check your oil, all your other fluids too, to make sure that they're not cloudy or dirty or milky. This motorcycle right here, it does have two types of, has brake fluid and also clutch fluid. Now the clutch fluid and the brake fluid, you can actually see that it's clear. That is indicating that the brake fluid is in good condition. Same with the clutch fluid. It almost looks completely clear. That means that there's no moisture or anything in it. Now what happens is when moisture gets into the brake fluid, it goes to like a milky color, almost like Kahlua in milk, like you have oil or water in your oil, in your engine oil. It turns to that milky color, or it actually goes black. And then you want to flush it out. That's super easy to do. You can almost do it yourself. If you're here in the early spring, there's if you go on our website, you can actually make your own bleeder bottle tool. to do it yourself. Your engine oil will look the same as your brake fluid. You'd like it to be clear. If it's dirty or black, you'd want to change it as well. For $49.95, we can do that for you. It includes your oil, filter, drain bolt washer, and the time to do it with up to 5 liters of mineral-based oil. And the oil that we use is Kawasaki oil, and it has a classification of JASA MA, which is probably one of the highest classifications a motorcycle oil can get. Does anybody have any questions, any maintenance things that they'd like me to cover? Yes, sir.
How often do you recommend changing the brake oil?
Question was, how often do I recommend changing the brake fluid?
Yeah.
You'd want to change it every 2 years. On average, if you're putting a lot of mileage on it and the fluid's getting quite hot, it can cause some moisture or condensation to build up. But on average, every 2 to 4 years to change it. How often should you change your coolant? You should change your coolant every 4 years. Or at least have it tested every three to 4 years to see what its freezing point is. If it goes below if the freezing point is above minus 35 degrees Celsius, you'd want to have it changed. The recommended is between minus 45 and minus 50. And there's what they call a hydrometer that you use to test it and tells you what the specific gravity is of the coolant.
Anything you should watch out for when cleaning your bike?
Anything you should watch out for when you're cleaning your bike? You should, while you're cleaning your bike, that's a good question, you can do a visual inspection of everything. It depends on how you're washing it, whether you're using a spray and wash. That's what we use in our service department. You just spray the bike down with either S100 or Maxim or Spectro bike wash, and then we use a pressure washer. When you are pressure washing it, you kind of want to stay away from the front and rear wheel bearings. They are sealed, but pressure washer is producing up around 15 to 2,500 pounds per square inch, so water, you can actually get water in it. So you want to try to avoid those areas. But everything else is pretty much, the newer motorcycles are all sealed with waterproof joints. Older bikes, you may want to stay away from the electrical components. Some of the older bikes that have open air filters, like K&N filters that you can actually see, you want to put a bag over them so that the water doesn't get into the filter. So once the water gets into the filter will absorb it, and then when you start the bike, the water will actually be going through the motor. So that's not good. It'll also cause poor running conditions, and it could cause some potential engine damage too. The mufflers usually have a drain hole in them where the water will seep out of it, but as soon as you start it, the low point is right here, usually, and the high point is up around the motor, so you'd have to fill it. You'd have to deliberately put water in there for about 5 minutes to fill up the exhaust to get it to go into your engine. And if that does happen, usually the best thing to do is drain the oil, let all the water run out, and then put fresh oil in and start it up right away. And drain your carburetors too, if you do not have fuel injector. And that'll eliminate any potential water damage.